So what about this? I'm bitter about being handicapped, but not about having a disability. What do you think she means by that? Any comments? Now, the Americans with Disabilities Act, I tell people sometimes, it came along in 1990 was just yesterday, right? Yeah. Okay, so the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, and the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990. Do you feel that people of color have complete and full rights in this society today? No, and it's a crime. But we also know we're not done yet with our implementation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. It has not fully been absorbed and covered and made happen in our society. And we really need to work to make that reality because it's so important. You know, I sometimes say Justin Dart literally gave his life and his fortune for this movement and for the passage of the ADA. And when they said he and Yoshika went around the country and collected testimony, some of us were at some of those testimonies. You know, I remember sitting in Kansas City and listening to a guy from Goodland who said he couldn't go to the Midnight Madness. This was discriminatory diaries. So he said, yeah, they won't let me in the Gibson store for Moonlight Madness because they said my wheelchair would be a hazard. Well, it was legal pre to the ADA, right? It's private business. They didn't get any federal money. They could exclude him because it was convenient for them to do so. And if you listen to some of those testimonies, some of that is still around there. There was another one, a woman who had a speech, had cerebral palsy, so her speech was difficult to understand. But she went to the theater. She wanted to watch a movie. $1 afternoon matinee, $1 matinee, right? So she pushes $1 across to the attendant. The attendant pushes it back and says, I don't know what you want. It was legal pre-ADA. And sometimes we forget how far we've come, but we also need to remember how far we have to go. We still have a lot to do to have this society be fully and completely accessible for people with all disabilities. I think the biggest, now maybe I'm going to go out on a limb on this, but my observation is that the biggest failure of our promise in the ADA is to the deaf community. Yeah, we got the relay going, and we all think that's great, you know, the telephone relay's going. But our interpreter service is provided easily. You would not believe, almost every week, I get a call from a center asking if they really have to provide interpreter services to people who are deaf. From centers. I just attended a meeting in San Diego. Silk Congress. Tim Beatty's there. He's from RSA. He's deaf. They didn't have an interpreter for him. I hope so. You know, who would not? But they invited him to come and speak, but they didn't provide an interpreter. What is that about? See?
I just also want to share that you know, we live in such a cocoon when we're in the independent living movement, and I work for the city of Salina, and I got to say they do a pretty good job. But living outside, most of what I hear is why we don't have to do that. No, we don't have to do that. And it is such a, you know, you guys have so much work to do because it is such an ongoing education process. And I'm constantly going to meetings and saying, you got to do this. And they say, well, no other city does that. And I'll show them the regulations. And they will do it when you show them the regulations and really put their feet to the fire. But honest to God, they don't think about it at all. And they think about ways, and there are trainers all over the United States who are going into businesses and teaching them ways to get around the law. And you know, I know you know that, but I think sometimes we get so caught up because we talk about it every day, we think about it every day. But the reality is, we're so much further than I thought we were, having gone into the rest of the world than where we need to be.
There's a lot that needs to happen.
Two basic things on physical access, like we mentioned, individuals that are deaf. You know, you get a call from an attorney wanting some assistance on getting an interpreter, and they only give you 3 or 4 hours notice or less than a day's notice. And in rural Kansas, it takes a couple days to get somebody lined out. Another example is You know, ADA was passed in 1990, and look how our statistics of our populations have grown so much. And if any of you ever need accessible parking, how sometimes that's lacking because so much more of the population is using that accommodation.
So the standards themselves may not be sufficient to the percentages in the population. That's right. That's right. Other comments or questions? Interesting area, huh? There's lots more. I could do a whole day on this, but we're trying to do this in small blocks. Doggone it. Okay, we're not going to do all these questions and answers. You may want to do them yourself for discussion, for potential discussion questions for your board afterwards. You can put that slide up or leave that slide up, and we'll cut the audio and we can go from there. So, there are some more resources in your presentation. Our story project is the YouTube I was mentioning, so you can go in there. Scads, I don't even know how many there are, of videos from a lot of the faces that I know and some that I don't, new ones and old ones. There's also another background on the independent living movement that you can find on our wiki. I'll give you a course on how to navigate our website a little later because it's in transition. The DVD link is there. Also the 60 Minutes interview with Ed Roberts, which was a real turning point, I think, for getting awareness out. It was a fantastic story that was done very, very well. You know, and it was the first time that most of the country had ever heard a person with a disability talk about being divorced.
Even though it is an independent living per se, the Minnesota TV Council has a wonderful website with tons of videos and information about the parent movement and independent living.
Excellent, good to know.
I wish we had a TV council like that. Colleen Wacker. I don't know if she's still there, but it is the
You know, historical documents, of course, Brian's out of the room, so I'll have to tell you. I don't know if they're still there. But back in the day, before computers, before email, you noticed it was a big deal when Justin Dart created a listserv? I mean, that was the earliest you could do that, right? So he created a listserv. But back in the day, when there was no email, he was on that National Council of the Disabled. He was the first person with a disability appointed to that council, as bizarre as that seems today. So at that time it was NCH, the National Council on the Handicapped. And he was such a smart man politically. He just knew exactly what to do. He sent out his own set of minutes for every single meeting. I was on that mailing list. I have no idea if those minutes are somewhere in your boxes somewhere or not.
Throw anything out.
Well, then it's probably there, because I didn't throw them out. But who knows, you know. I don't know where they went, but they were fantastic because, you know, the council was like doing nothing most of the time. And it was just so obvious from his minutes that their philosophy was skewed, that they were really there for a trip to see some family members. Somebody got them appointed so that they could, you know, go see Washington, I don't know. But anyway, he did his own set of minutes side by side with the regular minutes. And he just embarrassed him into changing. That was pretty much what he did. And he did it very well. Eventually brought Lex Frieden on as the director, and Lex and Justin together were really the toward independence people. Now, Justin moved from one place to another in Washington. His family was very politically connected. And so he was able to kind of chart a path for where he could have the most influence, and that's what he did. So he had a lot of influence as he moved through those different things. But you know, and those old Christmas cards and letters that we get from Justin and Yoshika, you know, there were just stacks of stuff like that. They kept in touch by paper because that was the only option. And he created a community where there really had been only pockets of community before. And we really owe him a lot. Nickel did a lot with that too. It was side by side. Both of those things had to happen together in order for centers and community to occur. So it was a really amazing time. Anyway, all those resources are fun, any one of which you could give to your board or show of peace. We're going to do a quick.
Could I just do one
Yeah,
more thing on
of course.
history? There is.
Wait for the mic.
I'm sorry. There is so much history in this state too, that like Paula was talking about, probably in boxes somewhere in Europe, because Paula was one of the leaders and one of the first rural centers that ever funded. It's just, I keep throwing this idea out, and somebody's going to catch it and do something with it. But Chris is the one who really inspired this for me. She asked that I do a history of independent living for her staff and board, and put together something about Kansas history too. And I'm just blown away that we don't do something that some student or somebody doesn't take some time to pull together. I was going through pictures the other day looking for something, and I found pictures. I had a picture of you and me and Brian with bags over his wheelchair because it was raining the day that we did the big march on the White House to get the ADA moving. And I mean, just all kinds of things. I just wish somebody would take the time to do the history of independent living in Kansas, because it really is rich with Mike Oxford and Toby and so many people that really champion, and people who aren't around or have moved away or done whatever they've done. And I wish somebody would take that on. If I had a grant, I would spend a year and just do nothing but that, because I really think it needs to be done. So just a thought.
There we go. We're right.
Gotta work on that. Gotta work on it.
One time, a long time ago, there was some kind of movement like that, some motivation, and at the caucus, there's a caucus, somebody that's a hoarder, probably in my drawer, somewhere. There's the caucus brochure, not the brochure, but the
Executive summary.
whatever, there's something. Everybody got it though when we got there, the little packet where you figure out what group you're going to go to or whatever the program. Thank you, oh man. Anyway, and it had in there, and it listed all these different things in order of what happened in Kansas, what we had accomplished in Kansas. It'd be a really good place to start, because of course that was a long time ago, so there's been plenty of other things that happened, but.
If anybody wants to scan and send me old documents, I'd work on it in my spare time.
I still have what I call an archive. They call it my piles or my boxes. But I like to keep that. I like to keep that old stuff to reflect back, and we're getting ready to celebrate. I don't know how many.
35.
35. And I'm just a hoarder, I guess, but they say I don't get rid of them.
Well, scan it all into a file and send it to us.
It's not, he's a hoarder, he's unorganized.
Well, you need to organize the staff.
Organized.
Gotcha.
Then maybe it wouldn't be.
I have to tell you one visual image. I wish we had had cell phones in our pockets with cameras in the day. But that same march where you have the picture of the three of us, one of my best memories about that was there's not enough elevators. You're right in the M, right? You're right in the metro down to the White House in order to go do this march. And there's not enough elevators to get everybody back up on the street level fast enough. So everybody whose wheelchair would fit got on the second tallest escalator in the country and in the world. There's the only bigger ones in Tokyo or someplace. So I remember looking up from the bottom and counting the wheelchairs up that line and thinking, boy, I sure hope everybody holds on. But it was worth it. And the other thing that was interesting about that march, the last thought here, is that there are a lot of African American folks who work in the city in Washington, D.C. We went about quitting time for work. And I was kind of on the outside edge of the group as I walked along. I got stopped by at least half a dozen African American folks who asked what was the march about, and two of them joined us. And because they got it, they got the rights piece immediately. They understood what that meant, and they thought, yeah, you're right. It shouldn't be legal for this kind of discrimination to go on. And so they joined in the march. So that was another moment, during that particular march at that time. All right, we don't have time before lunch to do this, but we're going to do it anyway. Summary of regulations. Oh, we have time to do this. We might not have time to do the next one. We have time to do this. All right, start with the basics. So how we manage our boards, how a board responds. starts with who we are and the requirements around the funding we receive. And even if your center is a Part B center, meaning you get state dollars rather than federal dollars, some of you get federal, some of you get state, some of you get both. Part C is federal, Part B is state, so you might get both. Whichever one you are, those regulations still apply, because even if the federal money is passed through, those regulations still apply. They're all considered federal funds. Now, this training then goes through some of those keys about what those funding are. And the interesting thing for me is philosophy is right up front in our regulations. This shows you how much political power we have had around the creation of this part of the Rehabilitation Act, the standards and indicators, and the development of the ADA, of course, being another, political piece. So this is what it says right up front. The purpose of this chapter is to promote a philosophy of independent living, including a philosophy of consumer control, peer support, self-help, self-determination, equal access, and individual and system advocacy in order to maximize the leadership, empowerment, independence, and productivity of individuals with disabilities and the integration and full inclusion of individuals with disabilities into the mainstream of American society. That's in the law. That isn't in some commentary beside the law. That's actually in the Rehab Act. So that's an important thing for us to kind of know. That's how the Title VII, the federal element, opens. Now, the regulations that apply to CILs, then the Rehab Act is a key part of it. The Code of Federal Regulations applies. The part of the Code of Federal Regulations that applies is found in Edgar. This is one book, and when I first was looking at this, I got all confused because I thought, well, I got to look at OMB, and then I got to look at Edgar, and then I got to look at CFR. No, they're all in the CFR book. This is just how they're organized. So Edgar is, but right now we're under the Education Department General Administration Regulations, and then those are based on the White House OMB circulars, and there are 3 of them we'll talk about in just a minute, but the Office of Management and Budget tells us how we can use federal money as nonprofit organizations. That's what's changing, by the way, that we'll talk about later that has to do with the PARs. And then, of course, everybody is also expected ethically to follow these Financial Accounting Standard Board and General Accepted Accounting procedures. So your accountants and your auditors, if you have them, will be following those. So those are the pieces, the Act, and then the CFR, which has Edgar in it, which translates OMB circulars for us. It goes like this. The Act it supersedes the rest of it. And the reason the Act supersedes the rest of it, because the Act supersedes the rest of it, the one big exception is the OMB circulars will not allow you to use federal funds for fundraising, and yet fund development is required in the Rehab Act. So we can do fund development. We are one of the few nonprofits funded with federal funds who can do that because it's in the Rehab Act. So does that make sense? So the Rehab Act supersedes the rest, and that's the one place where it's really obvious. There are some other regulations. If you're doing Medicaid anything, there's Medicaid billing stuff that goes with that. And there is usually a program-specific set of requirements that you have to look at if you have a specific program. If you're using HCBS funds, the waiver that those funds are under becomes a set of regulations for you. So all of those pieces come together as regulations you need to look at. Our advice is someone in the organization or someone that you consult with needs to be an expert in all of that.